4 penalties, 3 race weekends, 1 7-time world champion who has decided the officials are out to get him. That is the streak Lewis Hamilton drags into the summer break. And on the radio in Hungary, he finally snapped, saying every chance he hands the stewards, they punish him for it. So the sport waited for someone on the inside to settle the argument. What it got was a former FIA steward calling Hamilton the problem in public, in the bluntest language of the season. And who that steward is makes the whole thing worse. The man is Johnny Herbert. He sat in the steward's room himself, made these exact calls himself, and he has now looked at the most decorated driver on the grid and told him there is nobody else to blame. Herbert takes the Hungary penalty first, the pit lane speeding call, the one Hamilton is angriest about. His verdict is flat. The speeding offence was Hamilton's fault, full stop, and you cannot pin it on anyone else. Then he goes further. The Lewis of 10 years ago would never have made that mistake, and Herbert says he does not know how a driver of that class got his judgment so completely wrong. He is not finished. Herbert dismisses the whole idea that the officials are chasing Hamilton. In his telling, it is not as if the stewards have anything against Lewis, because that is simply not how the room works. Hamilton just has to learn to stop making mistakes like this one. And on the bigger charge, the one Hamilton has been building all summer, Herbert sides entirely with the panel he used to sit on. The stewards, he says, are doing an excellent job. So that is the collision. A 7-time champion says the system is rigged against him. A former insider says the champion is the problem. Both of them cannot be right. And the closer you look at the 4 penalties, the harder it gets to tell which one is lying to himself. Start where the streak starts, because the pattern matters more than any single call. It opens at Silverstone. Hamilton is handed a 5-second penalty for a false start, a twitch off the line that the timing loops flag before the cars have even reached the first corner. Hold on to that one. It comes back later, and it comes back in a way that nobody sees coming. A fortnight later at Spa, it happens again. Lap 1, the run down to Les Combes, and Hamilton makes contact with George Russell and spins the Mercedes out of the race. 5 seconds this time, for causing a collision. That same afternoon, Ferrari picks up a fine for an unsafe release, because Hamilton was sent out of his pit box straight into a mechanic who was standing in his path. 2 separate incidents, one weekend, and the growing sense that everything around the car is going wrong at once. Then comes Hungary, where the count doubles. In qualifying, Hamilton is running in the pole shootout when he holds up Oscar Piastri, who locks up and runs wide behind him. The stewards call it unnecessarily impeding and drop him 3 places on the grid. Hamilton says he was warned about Piastri only once the McLaren was already at his apex, that he had no idea it was coming, and he calls it a communication error from his own garage. It changes nothing. He starts 5th instead of 2nd, at a circuit where overtaking is close to impossible, and in the race, the 4th one lands. Under a virtual safety car, Hamilton releases his pit lane limiter a fraction early and crosses the line at 80.1 km/h. The limit is 80. He is over by 0.1, the smallest margin the system can even register, and it is enough. Another 5 seconds. He falls from 4th on the road to 5th in the results, behind his own teammate. That is the run. A false start, a collision, a grid drop, and a speeding penalty measured to 1/10 of a single km/h. 4 calls, 3 weekends, and a champion who has clearly stopped believing that any of it is random. Here is the part that should end the argument in Hamilton's favor. It does not. Hamilton does not just vent on the radio. He takes it into the room. At the Hungarian Grand Prix, the drivers and the FIA sit down for a meeting that has penalty consistency at the very top of the agenda, and Hamilton raises the Silverstone false start directly. He argues that it should never have been given, and by his account, the FIA agreed with him. One of his 4 penalties, by the governing body's own admission behind closed doors, should not exist. Think about what that does to the tally. The streak everyone is quoting, the 4 in 3, is really 3 the FIA will stand behind, and 1 it quietly concedes it got wrong. Hamilton walked into that meeting with a grievance and walked out with a partial confession. For a driver being told he is imagining the whole pattern, that is the single strongest card he holds, and it changes how the other 3 read. If the governing body can hand a 7-time champion a penalty at his home race and later admit it was a mistake, the question stops being whether Hamilton is paranoid. It becomes how confident anyone should be about the 3 that still stand. And that meeting was not called because of Hamilton alone. The whole grid had pushed steward inconsistency onto the agenda, with the contested Spa clash between Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri sitting right alongside his own. When an entire field of drivers spends its one sit-down with the governing body arguing over whether the rules are applied the same way twice, the man shouting about it on the radio starts to look less like a lone complainer and more like the loudest voice in a room that already agrees with him. And Hamilton is not the only driver this pit lane rule has quietly swallowed. His trouble actually starts earlier in the year, in Monaco, with the same offence, a 5-second hit for creeping over the pit lane limit by a tenth. Except in Monaco, it later emerged that the timing system was not even measuring the right thing. Formula One management had failed to account for a change to the pit entry barriers that shortened the measurement line by 77 centimeters, and 5 separate drivers were punished before anyone noticed. One of them, Pierre Gasly, lost a podium to it before the result was corrected days later. So when Hamilton says something is wrong with how these calls are being made, he is not inventing a conspiracy. He is pointing at a system that has already been caught measuring the wrong thing once this season. His team principal is pointing at the same thing and doing the forensic work for him. Fred Vasseur goes straight at the Hungary pit lane call, the 80.1, and takes it apart. The limit, he explains, is 80. The FIA actually allows 80.05 before it acts. Hamilton did 80.06, round that up and you get the 0.1 that ends up on the penalty sheet. 1/100th of a kilometre per hour over a tolerance that already exists. At the worst possible moment of a weekend already sliding sideways, when everything is running against you, Vasseur says, a tenth becomes an enormous number. He reaches back further, too. Not so long ago, the FIA used to let cars run all the way to 80.9 in the pit lane before calling it speeding. That tolerance has been quietly squeezed almost to nothing, and drivers are now being caught by margins that would have been invisible a few seasons ago. It is a rule that has moved under the driver's feet, and Hamilton happens to be the biggest name to fall through the gap it left. But Vasseur will not pretend all 4 calls are the same crime. The Russell collision at Spa, he insists, is a racing incident. And if Hamilton had the moment over again, he would ask him to do exactly the same thing, because the alternative was putting the car on the curb. It is a careful defense. He will not call his driver faultless. But his real argument is that the sport has tightened the screws to a point where a champion in a title fight is being punished for tenths and communication errors, and then having the whole run called a crime spree. Which is exactly why what happens next is so strange, because the loudest voice telling Hamilton to sit down and take responsibility is not a neutral one. So, back to Herbert, and the detail that turns his lecture into something a lot more awkward. Except Herbert left something off his own record. Johnny Herbert is telling Hamilton to respect the stewards and trust the process. Johnny Herbert was removed from that exact process by the FIA. And, not quietly, in the early weeks of 2025, the governing body ruled that his outside work was incompatible with sitting as a steward, and he was dropped from the role. What they objected to was his media work, including the opinions he sells to a betting company. And the very verdict on Hamilton that the whole paddock is now quoting was handed to that same betting platform. So, read the situation back slowly. A man the FIA judged unfit to serve as a steward is now going public, through a bookmaker, to defend the impartiality of the stewards who replaced him. The messenger telling Hamilton the officials are beyond question is the one the officials themselves decided they could not keep in the room. There is no cleaner example of a compromised witness anywhere in the sport right now. And yet his verdict on Hamilton is the one being carried across the paddock as if it settles the argument, precisely because it comes from a man who once wore the same badge as the stewards he is defending. And there is a reason they moved him on. In his final season on the panel, Herbert was openly critical of Max Verstappen, and he was on duty in Mexico when Verstappen was hit with 2 separate 10-second penalties in a race against Lando Norris. Red Bull complained loudly about a steward who also worked as a television pundit, passing judgment on their driver. Within months, Herbert was gone, and Christian Horner, of all people, said the FIA was right to drop him. That is the man now standing in front of Hamilton with a clipboard he no longer holds. It does not make his read of the 4 penalties wrong. A false start is a false start, and 80.1 is over 80. But it does mean the one voice being used to close the case against Hamilton is the least neutral voice available. A former official with a grudge history of his own and a paycheck from the same betting industry the FIA specifically objected to. Hamilton says the system is against him, and the system's answer arrives through a man the system threw out. These tenths are not free, either. They are quietly reshaping the championship. Hamilton goes into the summer break, sitting second in the drivers' standings, 50 points behind the new leader, Kimi Antonelli. That gap was 45 before Hungary. The pit lane penalty alone, the 0.1, stretched it out by another 5, because slipping behind Leclerc cost him the exact points that separate a manageable deficit from a widening one. For the first time in years, Hamilton is in a genuine title fight, and the margins deciding it are being set as much in the steward's room as out on the track. So the question that started all of this does not get any easier. Is Lewis Hamilton being targeted, or is he simply making mistakes at the worst possible time? The honest answer is that the evidence points both ways at once and refuses to settle. The FIA admits one penalty was wrong, which feeds the targeting story. 3 of the 4 trace back to something Hamilton or his team actually did, which feeds the mistake story. Both are true. Neither one cancels the other. And that is precisely why this will not go away. Whether Herbert is right about the speeding penalty barely matters now. He probably is. What comes next is what happens the first time a marginal call falls against Hamilton again, because everyone is watching now, and both sides have dug in. Formula One restarts at the Dutch Grand Prix later this month, with Hamilton 50 points down and no room left to give anything away. If the stewards hand him a 5th penalty in his 4th weekend, the story stops being about one champion's bad luck and turns into a genuine credibility problem for the officials, especially with the FIA already on record admitting it got one of these wrong. And if the penalties suddenly dry up, that raises its own uncomfortable question about why they were flowing so freely in the first place. Hamilton has told the stewards, in so many words, that he now treats every mistake he makes as an opening they are waiting to punish. That is not the mindset of a driver who believes the system is fair. It is the mindset of someone who has decided he is being watched more closely than anyone else on the grid, and who intends to prove it across the second half of the season. Whether he is right or just cornered, one thing is already settled. The quiet years between Lewis Hamilton and the FIA are over.